One, the Delaware County budget meetings are back in session. We've been in recess until 9:30 this morning. I'm Gary Merrill, President of the Board. To my left is Commissioner Barb Lewis, Vice President. And to my right is fellow Commissioner Jeff Benton. And our first presenter this morning is our county engineer and his members of his staff. And, Chris, I will let you make introductions.
All right, thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to present our budget for 2022. To my right is Chief Deputy Engineer Rob Riley, and over my right shoulder is Lee Bodnar, the administrator from our office.
So, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you. I'm going to be summarizing our budget from a document that we've shared with you that looks like this. So if you're okay following along with that.
Let's see.
So it has a pie chart at the bottom.
Pie chart.
Yeah.
Everybody got it?
I think Barb's still looking for her.
That's it.
There it is.
There it is.
Oh, gotcha. Oh. Okay. Oh, there it is, further back. Oh, great, thank you. Okay, thanks.
All right, so the first page outlines our projected revenues for 2022, and those come from 5 basic categories that are listed vertically in the columns. There's the Road and Bridge Fund, Road and Bridge General Fund, so that's the portion of the county sales tax that's allocated for road and bridge projects, and we're projecting a little over $23 million from that source in 2022. The Motor and Gas Fund, the column B, comes from gas tax and motor vehicle registrations, and a few other smaller sources, like when we do multi-governmental projects, and reimbursements from several other sources. That's projected to raise $11.9 million in 2022. And then we have federally funded projects that ebb and flow. Sometimes that number is in the multi-millions of dollars. Sometimes it's not. We have $125,000 projected in 2022 from federal funds. Contrast that with a year like 2 years ago when we did the South Old State project, and we had $15 million in federal funds. So that number can just be up and down based on the competitive nature of those projects. The state funding is a little more predictable from year to year, and the primary source of that is the Ohio Public Works Commission funds for local governments that we compete for annually. We're projecting $900,000 in 2022, and the E column is proceeds from the Slate Ridge TIF that there'll be money start to be expended from this year. So those are our primary sources of revenue. The pie chart at the bottom shows the magnitude of each of those in relation to our total revenue, which is around $44.4 million. And obviously the largest share of that, 63% of that, is from the road and bridge sales tax funds. So it's basically where we are in a snapshot picture from the revenue side. I'll stop there if you have questions about the revenues before we talk about expenditure.
The sales tax has climbed dramatically this year. How does your 23 budget compare to what you expect to get this year? Karen, I was looking at our schedule and I didn't see a comparable number.
I'll have to look.
Yeah, if you could. I looked at the revenue numbers for the engineer's budget for the schedules we got. From
Are you saying ours is lower than what you were
Oh,
expecting,
it's
or
like,
higher than what?
Well, it isn't apples and apples. It's
So the actual sales tax revenue is about $22 million. We also have an outstanding reimbursement for $964,000. So that's how we get to the 23. But the 22 was based on the auditor's projection,
Right.
at least in October when we made the.
But the revenue schedule you gave us in this package, Karen,
Okay.
doesn't have anywhere near 22 million.
Okay.
So,
I should, because
part of
they're the ones that entered the revenues, right? So,
part of the reason I bring it up is our projected sales tax revenue right now is less for next year than it is actual this year. So I think our revenue commission is being very conservative, and so we're trying to get a grasp on what, you know, we can reasonably expect that number to be, because we've got about a $14 million gap between revenues and expenses right now. Part of it is, I think revenues are understated, but a big part of it is we need to trim back some expenses too. So anyway, just, I was curious where you got that number and how it compared. My guess it's probably less than what you actually got this year if you use the auditor's number. So,
I would expect this year to be very close to that number, maybe a little higher. So,
yeah.
Any other questions on the revenue side? So turning the page, the next 4 pages are all detail regarding our expenditures. And I'll spare you the detail going through that line by line, but by category, our compensation is in line with the guidance you gave us in the budget memo. I would say to you that at some point in the current market, we really need to be doing an examination of where we are competitively. In the last year, we've had turnover in both our highway department and in our professional technical side, of losing some valuable people to the private sector. And I think I've shared with you, maybe individually, that the concern I get when ODOT runs commercials on Columbus radio that they're hiring CDL drivers, and they have a shortage of CDL drivers. It gets the attention of our employees, and I worry about losing our licensed qualified people to other agencies. And so,
How many vacancies do you have right now?
how many vacancies? We have, we have one, soon to be 2 vacancies in our highway department, and we have a vacant traffic engineering position. We've got one person covering 2 jobs. That's not really sustainable. We're getting by, but it's in the long run not sustainable on the
Okay.
professional side. We had an engineer that had accepted a job with another agency last year that we were able to retain, but had to make some changes to keep them. And so that's the kind of pressure we're under on the personnel side. And I'm guessing our office is not unique in
No,
that.
no.
So
Nor unique to the private sector either.
That's right.
It's just a lot of competition, period.
So the fringe benefits, health insurance and benefits are in line with the direction you've given us there. In the materials and supplies category, our large expenditures in this category are diesel and diesel fuel and gasoline and and salt. So those are the big numbers in that blue column. These are all expenditures that are made out of the motor and gas fund, not the general fund, but the gas tax, motor vehicle registration. You'll see from the pie chart at the end of this that we really try to match the capital expenditures to the sales tax and reserve more of these operational expenditures to match the revenue from our gas tax and motor vehicle registration. So we all know what's happening with fuel prices, and from our own experience, when we fill up the tank, it's not any different when when we fill up the fuel tank for diesel fuel and gasoline for our fleet. So that number is representative of that. It's always interesting to me to year to look at that salt number. So almost $820,000 a year for salt material that, you've heard me say this before, but if you spend $800,000 on steel and concrete and stone, you build something that's an asset that you hold on to, and you have something to show for it that has a life of 25 to 50 years. When you buy salt and you spread it on the road, it dissolves and it's gone. And so to think that we're approaching $1 million expenditure on something that is truly just an expendable, short-lived investment, that always sticks with me, the cost of that. So, we'll move on to services and charges, and I'll just highlight some of these larger categories. If you see anything smaller in there you want me to address, smaller in magnitude that you want me to address, I'll be glad to. So I'm not trying to gloss over too much, but in the interest of time, I won't go through each of these again. We under services and charges, we employ testing lab and construction material testing related to all the development activity in the county. So when a developer builds new streets, puts in new storm sewers, builds new structures, we not only inspect their installation and the quality of the workmanship, we inspect the materials to make sure the concrete meets the design standards, and the asphalt's compacted and the stone's compacted to the proper density. And so there's a cost to that. We show that as an incurred cost here, but it is offset by our inspection fees that we charge back to developers. The other items in this category really generally have to do with our mowing contract and tree removal and those types of things. Turning the page, this is where these next two pages are kind of the meat of the big things that are happening. The first category under maintenance contracts and agreements, we do a roadside or a roadway improvement program to keep the condition of our road pavements in good condition each year. We're proposing a $3.48 million contract in 2022, and that's also the contract that we couple with the other townships. I think we had 16 townships join that in 2021, and so there's that contract turns into about an $8 million contract in total, and it's probably one of the larger paving contracts around the state. So we attract some of the larger contractors who can be highly efficient, and I think give us good numbers for that work. So we'll continue to do that and continue to invest in keeping the condition of our pavements in a good serviceable condition. For us to move projects ahead to construction, and before I talk to you about the actual construction projects, there's a pipeline of things that have to happen in order for those projects to move forward, and those projects require the acquisition of additional right-of-way and land. Rarely do we have projects that we can build within the footprint of right-of-way that we currently own. You know that with all the right-of-way issues we bring before you from year to year. But here's a list of projects that in 2022 we will be in the right-of-way acquisition phase for. We're projecting to spend a little over $2 million in land acquisition in in 2022 for this list of projects. And so I don't know if you have any specific questions about any of those. If not, so we also employ the use of appraisals in order to acquire that right of way. We have to have appraisals, and at times we use the service of land acquisition companies to not only coordinate the appraisals, but to do the actual contact and negotiation with property owners on our behalf, just from a workload standpoint. We don't have near the staff to dedicate to multiple people to right-of-way acquisition. So we'll have another over $300,000 in land, $330,000 in land acquisition services. We have to pay to relocate utilities for our projects that are outside of the road right-of-way. If they are within our right-of-way, we can require them to be moved at the expense of the utility company. But in most cases, as we're expanding our right-of-way, we get into utilities that are they're already outside of the existing right-of-way. And when those have to be moved, those are our responsibility to pay for the relocation of them.
How's appropriate payment determined? I'm guessing the utilities probably are fairly aggressive on how they evaluate that, and is there checks and balances, or?
We evaluate and they give us their price for that relocation, and they do that work. So we don't typically hold the contract for the utility relocation. So it'd be up to the utility to do their own, but we'd have to reimburse them, and they will they'll give us a price of what that cost is projected to be. I would say the aggressive side of that would be aggressive in terms of protecting their interests in that. So
I'm trying to be polite.
Yes. If there are things that are glaring and we just think are gouging, we call them on that. And but we really are to some degree at their mercy on those costs. I would. Very rarely do they take advantage of that, though they do make sure what any of us would do to make sure that they've got their costs fully covered. So $550,000 in utility relocation in the coming year. In item 5420, we have road construction, and there are 8 construction projects that we have listed, in addition to some other expenditures for projects that involve transfers or work in-house. But the 2 largest projects for the coming year will be the improvement at the intersection of Home Road and Sawmill Parkway, and it's a $2.1 million project that the TID is doing. So that'll actually won't be a contract that your board will hold, but you'll be asked to make that transfer of $2.1 million to the TID so that they can award that contract. And then the Worthington Road, Africa Road intersection, and the improvements on Worthington Road north of that intersection are ongoing. Just about 30% of that this year, 70% of it next year. And that's 70% of that in 2022 is $3.8 million. So. So that those are the two larger projects. You'll note we have the first portion of Bixby Parkway included on this. We won't get all the way through that next year, but we'll get started and finish that in 23. And we also have a $1.89 million expenditure for the 3637 I-71 interchange. That is not road construction, but it comes out of this category because it's structured as an agreement with your with your board and the TID, for the TID to facilitate that project. And so this would be the transfer for, road and bridge sales tax money to the TID to facilitate that contract. All totaled, this year is a smaller than normal year in terms of construction. It is still $15 million is not a small program by most agency standards, but from our standpoint, it's a little smaller than usual. We don't have a really large flagship kind of project that we're doing, though the Worthington Africa Road project is very significant. So the next page, I'll show you some things to help you see what's in the pipeline. And as you chart our total contracts from year to year, that number's up and down all over the place. It is not consistent, and it can't be, just by the nature of each project has its own unique set of circumstances and costs, and so to try to budget a fixed number and match projects to that is kind of an impossible task. And so there'll be years, there have been years, and there will continue to be years that number's much higher, and maybe some years that are slower than this, just based on how projects get moved through the approval process. So, are there any questions about any of those projects or that category?
The Green Meadows Drive to Home Road, we were, is that to Home Road, or is it to?
That's the viewing, that's the section that you view.
Connects to North Road.
That connects.
Yeah, from Home Road to Lewis Center Road, that's
Okay.
that's
what that refers to, okay.
We talked
Because we talked about that yesterday, and that's good, that's great to see that. That's a nice project.
That'll be a nice connection when that's made.
Yep.
I just have just your observation, revenue coming in, certainly substantial by most counties' situation. The projects we have in the pipeline, how do you feel about our funding for those projects in the pipeline? Are you comfortable with it, or are you concerned?
We typically aren't advancing projects and we don't have some idea that it's going to be attainable from a funding standpoint. That doesn't mean that, and maybe it's a good time to turn to the next page. I'll skip over. Let me say one thing off of your question, and then I'll come right back to it, if that's okay. Before I turn the page, our bridge program, you'll see $220,000 out of the sales tax, and another $390,000 out of our motor and gas fund. So a $600,000 bridge program is evidence of what good condition our bridge system is in. We've been in the last 15 years, we've invested so heavily on the bridge side of things to get our bridge inventory into a really good condition. I think it's at or near the top in the state in terms of the condition of bridges. And so the fact that we're not spending a lot of money on major bridge replacement is really just indicative of how much money and effort we spent on that in recent years. And so this is another one that, there could be a bridge 2 or 3 years from now that could be a $3 or $4 million bridge project that could totally change the amount of money we're investing in bridges. But right now, I'm happy to report we don't have that as a challenge, and that we're able to focus that money on what I think is the bigger issue in our county, is the safety, congestion, traffic management kind of efforts, which is really the biggest challenge we face. So,
I had a question on, going back a page, I haven't heard much about it lately, but Big Walnut Interchange?
yes, So we'll, on page 4
Okay,
is a list of engineering, construction, and design contracts. And so this is the list of what's in the pipeline.
okay,
And what kind of things are ahead of us. And the Big Walnut Interchange is on this list. And just yesterday, Rob and I attended a meeting at ODOT's central office with the director and former Congressman T. Berry and Representative Carfagna, and to talk about a path forward for this project, because of the, I think we have encouraging news that at least ODOT has modified their evaluation criteria for projects like this. And it really used to be a pass-fail on just the impact on the interstate highway system. So if adding an interchange was detrimental to 71, then you had to either mitigate it or you couldn't do it. And in our case, the mitigation was either so onerous that we couldn't move forward, or it was even maybe unattainable realistically. ODOT's new criteria, that it's not a new movement for our project, but our project will maybe one of the first ones to go through this kind of scrutiny, is to look at a system-wide evaluation and say that our evaluation of these kind of improvements should not be limited solely to the interstate system, that it has impacts on the network, positive impacts on the network, and in the evaluation of those positive things also ought to be weighed as well. And so we continue to hear support from the director that it's a project they'd like to see, and so
okay.
the devil's in the details,
Yeah,
Barb.
sure.
And working through all that and making that a reality will still be a challenge. It's not, we don't have a clear path. This isn't this wasn't an approval of the interchange, but it did signal to us, I think, a reasonable path forward.
Yeah, so as Chris said, this is really, I think, will be one of the first, if not the first, in the state to kind of go through this new, ODOT's calling it kind of a holistic view or methodology, looking at not just the impacts on the interstate, but also network-wide, and looking at what does adding that interchange do to, say, Polaris and Gemini? What does it do to traffic on 23? What does it do to traffic on Cleveland Avenue and all the parallel routes that go towards Columbus? So this is a little bit of a new animal. The type of analysis we will be doing really hasn't been done so far. But in discussions with our consulting engineer and with ODOT, I think we've got a path forward, again, as Chris said, a methodology that we can use to do that analysis. Rough time frames, we're looking at probably the next 6 months or so, and basically revising what the work we've already done to get some more of the details, what the network impacts are going to be in a format that ODOT can hopefully review and approve. So that's, unfortunately, that's just to get to a place where we know whether this is viable, the project is viable under this new consideration, this new holistic approach. At that point, we will still have a lot of work to do yet on all the other things that any big project like this has to do, the environmental analysis, clearly the public involvement, and we'll continue to do that along the way, but we'll be probably getting a little more focused once we know whether this is actually a viable project from a traffic and kind of technical standpoint. But that's the time frame we're looking at is about 6 months, so sometime mid next year, I think we'll have a better idea of whether this new approach actually is a door that's going to allow us to move forward.
So, I'm not an engineer, let me state that up front. But I always think I tend to see the bigger picture. But so obviously this would have a positive impact on Polaris. area as far as removing traffic from there. Probably to some degree 23 and some of these other parallel roads, et cetera. So what is the parameter that you have to reach for it to be substantial enough to make a difference on this project one way or the other? It seems pretty subjective.
Yeah, I don't think we know yet.
Yeah.
The test up till now has been this anti-degradation test. You can't degrade the function of the interstate system by adding your, their policy's written that they can now consider these other factors. But it's loosely enough written, as I understand it, that it is very subjective. And the good news is they're willing to consider other factors, but they're not, they're not quantifiable in terms of a threshold or a number that you're trying to get to.
Well, it sounds like positive.
It is,
It
yeah.
is. Because really under the old pass-fail criteria, if you will, for 7071, we frankly just couldn't get a solution to work that without one of two things, either extending a lane on 71 south all the way past 270, which if you think about everything that it would run, ODOT just upgraded from Gemini South, this would have been another lane on top of that upgrade. So just the magnitude of cost there. So that was one option. The other option would be to meter the ramp, where in the morning you would have to wait at Big Walnut Road to get on, and that metering would frankly potentially be so significant that you might have to wait. It might be one car every 10 seconds, something like that, where you might have this long backup of traffic trying to get on the freeway. So what we're trying to do is get to what I'd call kind of a happy medium where we know there's going to be some level of additional traffic on 71, and we know there may have to be some metering. There may still be a red and green light on the ramp to kind of control or throttle that flow of traffic onto the freeway, but get to something we think is reasonable and that ODOT can live with and we can live with. So it's a target. There's no objective criteria for this methodology just yet. We're going to have to still show what that degradation is on 71, if any. So more to come, I think.
The fact that it's subjective probably helps us, and that's
Yeah.
being one of the first ones
Oh,
in.
great, yes.
We may get a chance to.
And we're one of the first ones in because this project has been on the discussion for so
ODOT's
long.
quick to say they didn't do this for this project, but they've run into the same idea, the same challenge on other projects that they have on this project, that their criteria was so rigid that projects that were good but not perfect couldn't move forward. The Polaris and Gemini project had traffic queued up and backed up, congested at peak hours, and they knew that when they built it and accepted that because the delay was not on 71, it was off the system. Rob and I writing back yesterday, he used that great line that don't let perfect be the enemy of good,
Yeah,
right? And
yeah.
that's kind of what their criteria has been, that if you can't make an improvement that's perfect and solves every problem, then you forego a bunch of projects that could do a lot of good. We could have an interchange that works really well for 22 hours of the day and have to live with some congestion for an hour or two a day. It's no different than what's going on every interchange south of 270 on 71 right now. Some of those worse than what we're proposing to do. And so,
How does the second interchange at 36 factor into this work and study?
correct me if I'm wrong, Rob, but the most recent traffic analysis that ODOT is using there considers Big Walnut Road, the Big Walnut interchange to be in place.
That's probably positive as well then, is they consider compatible.
Yes. I think,
Or,
yeah.
beneficial.
And necessary,
Yeah.
yeah.
So the analysis is, we do in these cases is always looking out a minimum of 20 years. And so it's not just looking at it today, it's what it's going to be in 20 years. And clearly with all the growth we're seeing in Delaware, we have some, the traffic models that try to predict what, the electronic models that try to predict what traffic will look like are pretty aggressive in terms of the growth assumptions they're using. And so that's a struggle. I mean, in a community like ours where, you know, traffic on some roads will double, I mean, in that next 20 years. And so that's a challenge. I was going to note one of the important elements of this interchange is it actually helps shorten people's trips. And so if you think about the folks that are in the interchange area that might want to use it, which way are they going now? I mean, some of those folks, if you're probably north of, say, Plum Road, you might be going up to Route 36 to get on the freeway to head back down to Columbus if that's the way you're going. So a lot of folks right now are taking these long diversions to get where they want to go just because it's quicker. What the traffic modeling we've done so far shows that there's a pretty significant reduction in the miles traveled per vehicle in this area because of the interchange. I mean, that's a good measure showing it works really well. In fact, it almost works too well because it just kind of pulls all that traffic onto 71. So that is one of the measures of effectiveness, we'll be able to use in this study moving forward. And that's a good thing for everyone. ODOT recognizes that. Federal Highway recognizes that shortening the number of miles people are traveling is fundamentally a good thing. So just thought I'd point that out.
I did have a question too about this, ODOT, you know, is taking public comment regarding getting the 23 corridor less congested. Could you just give us some, your thoughts on that? I mean, they're talking about, I guess, something more expensive if 23 itself were just redone, like, you know, go underneath, put more lanes, whatever, and then east and west. What's anything coming from that you're seeing?
Well, first of all, I think it's a positive sign that ODOT's identifying the problem and wants and is putting the effort into this approach of trying to improve the connectivity and the travel times from Northwest Ohio and their access via the 71 corridor to Columbus. And so though that's not necessarily our goal, we benefit from that. Existing Route 23 is not just a problem for commuters coming through Delaware County. It's a problem for our local commuters going to and from work and school and businesses. And so from an economic development standpoint, the viability of those activities along the 23 corridor will benefit from what they're doing. And so I'm glad they're here. Projects like this always create angst and concern from residents. Sure. And we can't diminish that. I mean, any of us would be concerned if we thought a project was going to negatively affect our lives and our homes. So there certainly is going to be more and more talk and chatter and concern. And my wife shows me Facebook. I don't spend much time with my nose in Facebook, but she shows me comments that there's some people stirred up, and I understand that. ODOT understands that. So so no matter which way this goes, there are going to be people that aren't happy about the outcome. You probably already know, but there really are three basic concepts. There's a couple variations on those concepts. One would be just to take improve Route 23 from Delaware to 270. And everything I'm seeing, that by improving it, that means making that into an interstate level roadway with
Oh, okay.
is it 11 interchanges, 11 places they identified the need for. Is that
At least that many,
yeah?
yeah.
So think about all of the activities and all the businesses along 23 and turning that into an interstate highway with the access limited to on and off ramps.
Okay.
That's a monumental undertaking. Another concept is for the project to go to the east, north of Delaware, for it to peel off and either go over to I-71 as a new interchange on I-71, or to connect to 36 and use the 3671 interchanges for that linkage. And then there's a proposal to take it to the west, which would take it over to Route 33, which has interstate access into 270, and that has a couple variations. One would be a new interchange on 33 between 42 and Marysville. Another one shows it connecting to 42 and using part of the Route 42 alignment over to Route 33 and the 42-33 interchange. So those are the variations. The ODOT, everything I've seen is taking a pretty analytical approach to this. I don't think they have their mind made up. I don't think they have an alternative hidden in their back pocket they're trying to steer things towards. I think they'll look at the various costs and any of the environmental obstacles and try to come to some level of selecting at least a concept. And even when they get to that point of selecting a concept, it'll be far from detailed in terms of an alignment or knowing what properties it's on. So I really think the best thing the county can do at this point is support their activities doing the study. And to the point where you're asked for input, I would think that from an economic development standpoint, the eastern route would have more benefit to the county. But let's let ODOT do their work, and it may be that they might find something that shows that's twice as expensive as another alternative. So I think it's too early for us to stake out a position, but I think it's fair of us to ask questions about. I mentioned a few minutes ago the TID's contract on advancing the southern interchange at 3671, and so having this kind of pair of interchanges there. None of the traffic that proposal right now is being designed for would include a connection from 23 to 36 going through that interchange. And so the impacts that, we talked about the Big Walnut interchange and the impact it would have on I-71. If there's a connection from 23 over to 71, that probably necessitates improvements on 71 far beyond what we're talking about with Big Walnut. And so there are a lot of questions for us to ask and to let ODOT know that we have concerns about those things and would like those incorporated in the study.
Is there a timeline that they're rough?
The meeting I attended, make some sort of, I won't say the final proposal, but at least next April, May, I think I heard.
What did you hear?
Yeah.
April, May, I think.
Oh,
it's
April,
supposed to
May,
be.
wow.
Yeah, mid-year,
Okay.
yeah.
I just wanted to add, I think, based on what we've heard so far in our discussions with ODOT, and probably what you've gleaned so far from your involvement, it's very much freight movement is a big component of this study. One of at the core of the purpose and need of the project is kind of creating this free-flowing connection from 270 up to Toledo, in essence, which you already have, except for between 270 and Waldo. So that's the section, obviously, we're looking at. You don't need to spend more than 30 seconds looking on the news to hear about supply chain problems, and so freight is a huge component of that, moving freight from Toledo or Detroit through Columbus to other points. I mean, saving as little as 10 minutes per vehicle could have a profound effect on moving freight in the Midwest.
You need to tell that to the administration.
Yeah, absolutely. So I do think now is a good time for ODOT to be pursuing this with that in mind, because in the latest transportation bill, there was pretty significant investment made in freight movement. They have some national level grants available that I'm sure ODOT will try to tap into that recognize the importance of freight movement. So I'd say in terms of timing, now hopefully is a really good time to be looking at this, given the nature of things right now.
Yeah, a couple of concerns that I've attended most of the study meetings and the committee, and I've expressed the concern about trying to route that traffic through Berlin Business Park. You know, because anywhere basically between Delaware and 71 is the Berlin Business Park, which now is in progress and being developed. And I mean, there's the practical side, there's the expense, there's the development, the economic development impact. You know, that's our growth engine for Delaware County. So I think they understand that, you know. And then you'd mentioned the impact to the second interchange at 36. I mean, that's not factored in today. I mean, that would be enormous. And then the impact of that, maybe a little bypass, I think we'd call it, the Glen Parkway extension that could connect, or is scheduled to connect, you know, all the way up to 23, could really divert some traffic as well as an interim improvement to the 23 corridor. So I've made those points. I think they're aware of it. You know, they're considering those things. I know they're being careful and diligent in this process.
The meeting I attended, everybody had an opinion, but a gentleman made a comment, I don't recall who it was, but he says, is there anyone here who doesn't think this is needed? Because there's a diversity of opinion, and everyone, and if I'm a farmer, I don't want to see my farm split. And I think that's the point he's trying to make. It's going to affect somebody, but we all agree that it needs to be done. And I thought that was a pretty cogent comment to make, and really kind of clarified the point. I think everybody in that room did a great job, very professional in expressing their concerns, how it was going to impact them, or how they had not been involved in the process. But I don't get the impression anybody there was opposed to the need or the willingness to work with ODOT. So that was my impression. An hour and a half, I froze in fairgrounds that day.
I know.
It was cold.
It was cold. Yeah, the doors open, the wind blowing, it was like a wind tunnel.
But
So, you know, we as a county are a stakeholder in this, obviously not the key holder to the project, but ODOT's done a good job of coordinating with us and keeping us in the loop and ask us relevant questions, and so more to
Good,
come.
thank you. Yeah.
so back to the question I asked a while
Yes.
ago.
Yeah, so your question was about the funding for this list of projects that we have in the pipeline, and that this 5427 category has 25 plus projects in development for coming years under construction and design services engineering. So there are projects here that we are anticipating that we would receive federal funding for. In our plan for funding those are expectations and anticipation of being able to secure additional funding. It's not a bird in the hand. We don't have that money in our coffers, but I do think we stand a reasonable chance of competing for for funding for some of those larger projects. And so I'd point out to you that the 5 categories I show, the far right one is the only TIF that we're showing activity and revenue activity for us for this year. But as you know, you've approved a lot of TIF deals in the last 3 or 4 years that we'll start to see revenue from in the coming years, and that'll change our revenue projections as well as development occurs in those projects.
The federal infrastructure bill does have a significant amount of dollars targeted for roads in Ohio. I think Ohio got like $9 billion of
It
roads.
does,
And
yeah.
when do you think that would be
We heard-
allocated, if you
There was a
will?
brief discussion with the director about that yesterday at our meeting at ODOT, and he correctly pointed out that the real information about that comes from the rulemaking and at the administration level from the Federal Highway Administration. Most of that money is going to flow to the states the way it does now to ODOT, and ODOT would distribute that money within the confines of whatever rules and pots of money that ODOT puts that in, or that the Federal Highway Administration puts that in. There's also mention of funding availability for direct application from local governments to the Federal Highway Administration for some funding that won't go through the Department of Transportation. We don't know yet. There's really no information about what those programs will look like or what magnitude that will be. That remains to be seen, but it's the fact that the bill contemplates that and allows that. The director said that the real work to be done at this point is to be involved in that rulemaking feedback that he said would be happening over the next year. So it's not, I don't think it's like the FHWA is going to come out in February and say these are the new federal highway rules. That's something that's going to be evolving and changing before we see a finished product.
Based on what we've seen so far, just of the bill, the explanations that I've read at least, the funding through the existing programs that ODOT, that we're accustomed to seeking through ODOT, there's a 20 to 30% increase in those programs over the next 5 years. So that amount will progressively increase over the next 5 years. And so if nothing else, we know that the existing programs we've been able to make use of. The highway safety program, we've been beneficiaries of. The MORPC funding, MORPC gets a statutory allocation. That will also grow, so there will be a bigger pot of money that we will be able to compete for. So
it's really too early to tell exactly what we're talking about.
We don't have details at all. We do know that there's more money that'll be coming to ODOT. We don't yet know how that trickles down to us.
One last question for me, anyone else? The 2 interchanges, which one's likely to be built first?
Between 36 and Big Walnut, 36.
yeah.
Any questions from anyone else?
No, thank you. It's really been helpful.
I'm sorry.
It's really been helpful.
We really appreciate what the job you guys do, and I think the county constituents, the people who live in our county appreciate it as well. I think we're fortunate to have the funding we have that makes it possible, and that really goes to the taxpayers who make it possible. So, and we appreciate the job you do. One last thought. There is some bridge money is going to be out there, correct? Now, the good news is we have very little bridges, but to the degree that we do, I assume we'll be trying to ask for that money.
Absolutely.
We will. We'll use it to the extent that we can. There have been 2 rounds of state bridge funding in the last 5 years for critical bridge repairs, and I think we're one of 2 or 3 counties that got none. And one of our unnamed neighboring counties, I think, got 12. So, but it's an indication of how bad things were. They were trying to
But my
address
point
it
is, we
first.
will be asking.
We will. We asked, yeah, we beat our
Yeah,
heads
you
against the
will.
wall saying, you know,
Yeah,
our residents deserve, our taxpayers deserve a return on their investment just like every place else. But that's not a different battle than you
Everything
have to
else.
face on a much
Schools.
bigger list than what we do, I'm sure. But,
Guys, thank you very much.
yeah, thank you.
Thank
Let
you.
me just say thank you for your support of what we do. And that I continue to think transportation is one of the hot button issues for the people we represent. And I appreciate the fact that you're pushing me at times to get projects done instead of me having to convince you that we need to spend more money on transportation. So thank you for your acknowledgement of the importance of what we do.
thank you. You do a great job,
Yeah.
great job.
Thank you very much, guys.